Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's Technical Standards Working Group on device testing for the managed charging programs. Today is June 21st, 2023, and I appreciate you all hopping on for our working group this afternoon. Can we go to the next slide, please? So today's agenda, welcome introductions. Thank you all for taking the time this afternoon. We have 3 stakeholder presentations today. We have one from General Motors, one from Tesco, and another from EPA and ICF, who will be speaking more on the Energy Star certification process. We'll hold time at the end for Q&A, and we'll also hold time to talk through next steps. Just want to note that the upcoming Technical Standards Working Group will be moved from July 12th to July 26th, and we'll be posting an updated notice on DMM after this meeting. A few housekeeping items before I hand it over to our presenters for today. Please remain muted. You can use the chat or raise hand functions to ask questions during the Q&A portion. Questions received through the chat during the presentations will be addressed first. Presentation materials will be posted on DMM, and just to note that this session is being recorded. If you have a question, please put it in the chat as we begin the presentations. I think the best way to do this today, we'll have our 3 presenters go forward with their slides, and then after each presenter is done, we'll do maybe a 5-minute or so Q&A on that specific presentation, and then any additional questions we will address at the end at the broader Q&A portion here. So with that, I'll hand the floor over to General Motors.
Thank you, Jen. I will just take a second to pull up our slides. Okay, can somebody just confirm that you're able to see our slides okay?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, great. So thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Lauren, Lindsay, Davey, from the DPS and Joint Utilities side for giving us the opportunity at GM Energy to present today. We're very excited to be engaged with this group. I will be just providing first, an initial introduction to GM and GM Energy, coming from my standpoint as one of the members on our business development team, working with some of the utility programs around V1G, V2G, et cetera, demand response managed charging, and how we're working in these spaces with EV telematics. And then I will be passing it over to my colleague, Mike Cartwright, who will then take us through some of the particulars on the EV telematics side, as well as the M&B and usage reports. Just, I don't think I mentioned my full name. I'm Harris Scher from GM Energy, and just to, again, really appreciate the opportunity to be here for this call. So just jumping right in, at a GM overall level, I just wanted to kind of take us through some of the key notable goals of us as a company, as an EV manufacturer, and as that relates to some of our guiding goals. Zero crashes, zero emissions, zero congestion, so safety, environmental goal, and just overall customer experience, and ensuring that our vehicles are moving towards all of these targets as we propel our offerings and our products forward. Just moving on to now, GM Energy is a relatively new sub brand to GM, and we were announced back in October of last year. And we have our own set of guiding principles as they relate to, trying to provide innovative energy solutions in several different key areas that, as you get a little bit more familiar with our product offerings, and you can visit the GM Energy website to do that, you'll see them kind of broken up into several different categories, every home, every community, every business. And that's demonstrated in some of the initial products that are coming to market in the near future, as it relates to our residential EV charging and home energy management battery storage products, our Ultium 360 charging network, and some of our commercial scale products as well, commercial scale charging and battery storage from that front as well. So we're really trying to focus on as many different sort of key areas that are in need of these revolutionary or innovative energy solutions, and how they can also support the overall electrification journey for customers in all these different segments. The team at GM Energy, as you know, I have some exposure to some of the folks on the call. I've worked myself in the energy industry prior to coming to GM, and there's a number of other folks who are either on the call right now, coming from the utility or energy sector, as well as just across our team in various different other metropolitan areas, Detroit. We've really tried to pull in a wide variety of energy experts with really kind of far-reaching experience, especially as it relates to, this combination of storage, EVs, EV services, and how vehicle grid integration can really flow and have the best sort of trajectory. So, I think it's just a testament to the team that we've put together, and why folks, such as myself, coming from a NYSERDA and New York State and New York City government perspective, ended up on the GM Energy side. We are, have our focus on really trying to form relationships with kind of the traditional sort of segments that are very active in the energy space, and that's kind of a key area for us, is to really sort of mirror that on the GM Energy side as it relates to the community stakeholders, or EV fleet owners are a traditional sector that GM has certainly been involved with, property developers or DER asset developers. Government is clearly an important area. Large property owners that are looking at EV charging and electrification support for their properties, as well as forming relationships and partnering with utilities. The last slide that I'll really just touch on today is just, highlighting that it's starting to take a degree of effort, to keep track of our EV releases, and I think that that's a really good thing. Many folks on the call are probably very familiar with the Bolt EV and EUV, and probably the Volt that came before it. But this just really highlights that we're releasing multiple EVs across multiple different brands. Some of them are already on the market now, but in just making it in smaller quantities that will be ramping up in the pretty near future. As well as just highlighting that there's going to be a number of kind of key mainstream EV releases in the very near future, 2023, 2024. The Equinox and Silverado coming later on this year, Blazer shortly thereafter, as well as some new Cadillac models you should be hearing about in the relatively near future, and later on this summer as well. And then the last piece here are our BrightDrop delivery vehicles that you may see some of them on the road, or a growing number in the near future. And these are all, just tie into our overall kind of electrification journey and trajectory, and how we're looking to support our customers. I think that kind of takes me to the end of the intro side. I will pass it on over to Mike Cartwright, who's going to start to discuss, I think, some of the pieces here that are really deeply focused on the EV accuracy discussion that this technical standards working group is focused on.
All right. Thanks, Harris. I appreciate that. A fantastic intro. I guess maybe I stop for a second. Does anyone have any questions quickly on what Harris had gone over? Okay. If we don't have everything, I don't see anything in chat, I'll go forward. So I'm Mike Cartwright, working with the GM Energy team. I'm specifically on the platform team, working on building the back end for managed charging programs and some of the other programs and products we're working with. So I wanted to kind of give a high level overview from an EV perspective, the data that we're getting. So in this case here, we're showing kind of an example of the current status of how we're getting data from the vehicles. In most cases, we are getting event-based data. So we're not at the point yet where we're getting streaming time series data. That we are getting event-based coming off the vehicle. So when the vehicle turns off, we get a package of information. When the customer plugs in, we'll get information. And then when the charging status goes from active or charging status ended or interrupted, we'll also get a packet of data from the vehicle. The same thing for a coupler status and ignition off. So we aren't getting consistent data off the vehicles, but at all the key events, we are able to get data coming from the vehicle. And we can jump to, and this data is coming via a cellular network. So we do have our OnStar system that is using a cellular network to send the data from the vehicle to our back end. So just continuing on with when the data is sent, a key piece as well is that if the EV cannot establish a cellular data connection at the time of an event, the charge session data will be stored on the vehicle, and it will be sent at a later date when the EV has regained a cellular data connection. So that's an important piece. I know there's a concern that, hey, people may not always have the cellular connection, but we do have the ability to store that data and send it at a later date. We are looking to go forward. So what we showed earlier was the current state of technology, but we are looking to improve that. And so future EV platforms will allow GM to communicate more frequently with the vehicle. For example, we should have multiple data payloads sent during each charge session. So we're looking to have updates at least 5% state of charge, or hopefully even smaller. So every 5% of state of charge, we get a data update letting us know what's the state of charge of the vehicle, which would then be able to understand how much energy has gone into the vehicle from the previous data point that we got. And then as we go forward, so that's some of the vehicles will be available soon. And then in the next year or two, we'll start to have a little bit more information with our Ultifi platform. This is going to have built around the ability to send data even more frequently. And so we were hoping to, in that case, almost get time series data where we should be having consistent data throughout the entire time the vehicle's off and charging. So as we get to that Ultifi platform in a couple of years, we'll have significantly more information and data coming from the vehicle. Next slide, Harris. So the other piece is that we do have some data available, so customers can use the MyBrand mobile app to view the charge session data during ignition off. However, due to some 12-volt battery constraint issues, there is limited number. I'm sorry, my vacuum cleaner is running by me, so I'm having to turn off my vacuum cleaner, my robot vacuum cleaner. We have limited availability of when we can pull data from the vehicle during an off state. So because of 12-volt battery constraints, we don't want to drain the battery, and we don't have the APM on to take high voltage power to the 12-volt battery. And some of the older vehicles, we do have a limited period of time when you can pull data off the vehicle through the MyBrand app and APIs. So just talking a little bit about the charge session data collected and sent. Typically, a charge session event data collection from the EV will include a timestamp, the battery state of charge. Any additional information may be collected based on program-specific requirements. So we have been doing some stuff where we would add a lat long, or whether or not a customer opted out. So for managed charging, we also have the ability to do that. For the data that we actually pull off the vehicle, we can calculate the average charge session power, a kilowatt, and the real-time power is going to be based off a change in energy, and then divided by the charge session to get the power. So we don't actually measure power. We're actually, in most cases, doing a calculation. Again, in the future, we're trying to do a better job of actually getting a real-time power. But at this point in time, we have to do a calculation to get the power value. So we're taking that energy and dividing that by the charge session duration to get a kilowatt value. The GM EV onboard charging management calculates the AC power coming in from the wall. So we don't actually measure that. So it is a calculation. I think some of the other people from Ford, Dave, had talked about that, and others have talked about that. That we typically aren't measuring that we are really, from a EV perspective at this point in time, we've been really focused on what goes into the battery and not as much what's coming out of the wall. So at this point in time, we don't actually physically have good sensors to measure the power. And so we're actually having to do a calculation where we take the energy that we know goes into the battery, knowing the inverter efficiency characteristics and other factors such as temperature and other things. We're able to do a pretty good job of then calculating what was the AC power coming from the wall. But at this point in time, we're not actually measuring that. We do have the ability that we can measure the AC voltage, so that's important if we want to know whether it's a level 1, 120 volt, or level 2, 240 volt. So we do have the ability to measure that, but we don't have a good sensor for measuring the current on the AC side coming into the onboard inverter. Next slide then, Harris. And so this is just kind of showing that the bottom there, showing an illustration of that we have very good current voltage measurements going into the battery, but typically only have a lower resolution voltage sensor on the AC side coming into that onboard charging inverter. The other piece that we try to look at, so as we're doing some of the managed charging programs, the charge session energy consumed by the EV is the DC energy that goes into the battery. So we'll often look at the delta state of charge times the battery capacity, and is not the wall energy that is pulled from the grid. We're again working on that, trying to do a better job where we're improving those estimates for what is the estimated wall energy. But for many of the programs, and in those cases, the utility is really asking for the change in state of charge and battery capacity and doing the calculation of the energy into the battery and not specifically the energy coming out of the wall. Yeah, I think that's good. We can jump on to the next one then. Any questions on that before we move on to the next piece on data reporting?
Yeah, Mike, I have a question on something you brought up earlier. You mentioned in an earlier slide that the data is stored somewhere, if not uploaded via cellular data. If there's, I guess, someone's out of service or something happens with the cell phone data, where is that data stored if not uploaded to the cloud? Is there some sort of backup storage involved in the GM system?
Yeah, so there is onboard on the vehicle, there is some memory capability, some storage capability. So it is stored on vehicle. And then when like I said, once we regain a cellular connection, we're able to pull that information from the onboard storage, memory storage, and then be able to send that to our back office where we'll receive that. It is timestamped, so we know when the event occurred. So there is a event timestamp. So we're not using the timestamp associated when we actually receive the data from the back office. We also collect that, but there is a timestamp associated with the event. So we know, hey, if this event occurred the day before, there is a timestamp associated with that. So if it comes back 24 hours, we know, hey, this happened yesterday. We know exactly when and where from a lat long perspective that event occurred. So there is a lot of information that is stored with that. So we're still getting very accurate information, even if it does come back a day later. But it's just that you just have that lag at that point in time from when the actual event occurred.
Okay, got it. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, I guess that if that's no more questions, we'll go into some of the data and reporting. So we've had, and again, we can't take full credit on this, that a lot of this that we're currently doing from a reporting point of view for some of the utility managed charging programs have been in collaboration with the other OEMs, part of the OVGIP collaboration. So in a lot of cases, when we are doing these programs, we would be able, through an enrollment piece, be able to share meter and account level data. So we have the ability to collect an account ID from the customer as they're going through the enrollment process. We have charge event details, as we mentioned before. So when does the vehicle start and stop charging? What was the change of state of charge? If we have the wall energy, we'll be able to provide that. So a lot of information on the charge event, not only when the charging occurred, but when plug in and plug out occurred. As I mentioned, the energy consumed, or in the case of a demand response, we'll actually try to calculate the avoided energy. So knowing what the vehicle was doing before a demand response event, how much energy or power was being pulled by the vehicle, we'll then be able to use that to calculate that if we stop charging for 2 hours or 3 hours, what is the avoided energy. So we've got the ability to do that calculation. We also have the ability to add in that, what is the event type? So is it a curtailment? Is it a demand response event? A deferral, or were we doing something where the event was actually a time of use or a day ahead pricing, and we are doing the demand charging or the charge session based off a rate or event signal. And we also would be able to share that the charging preferences and profiles that the customer would enter in. When do they want their vehicle charged, to what state of charge, what time they want to have their departure time. So that's information that we collect and could be available. We also are working on, we have aggregated data that could be included. So the overall number of participants in an event or per day, territory-wide or even sub-network specific information, total energy avoided consumed for a fleet or utility, or again, if there's a specific group you want to look at, that we have the ability to aggregate and put in give you group information on that energy avoided or consumed, as well as going through and doing a calculation for the total load shed for that aggregated fleet of vehicles that we're managing. And some of the optional data fields and analytics, as we mentioned before, we got very accurate GPS and that capability. So we have very good location-based capabilities. So we can have an EV location-based flag or the location itself saying that, hey, was this at the home location or was it a specific location? So we can include that. We have charge event-based customer opt-outs. So again, for all of our managed charging programs, the default is we're opting you in. So if you've enrolled in a program, we are going to opt you into that. So we're either going to stop your charging during a demand response event, or if we're doing a day ahead pricing or something like that, we are going to opt you in and we will manage your charge. And you'll have to opt out if you don't want your vehicle to follow that charge command or not participate in a demand response. So we do include that. So to let the utilities or whoever else we're working with know that if there was an opt-out, who opted out and the number of opt-outs. And we'd also be able to share with you the make and model, as well as like battery capacity and charging capacity of that vehicle. We're still not 100% on our level 1 versus level 2, but we still have a pretty good job of being able to say if the vehicle is connected to a level 1 or level 2 charger based off the power feedback. Anything else on that, Harris, that I missed that we should throw in there?
No, not for me. I think you pretty much covered all of the key points. I would, the only thing I would just that comes to mind and kind of hearing you go through all that is, the why some of these fields, tend to be optional, or, we encourage people to kind of consider looking at aggregated data is, we understand that across the industry, if it's GM, if it's the utilities, if it's the general public, to the extent that we can, prevent the transfer of customer PI, that's an area that, we often are having conversations with to, ensure that, we're limiting as much risk there as possible.
That's a great point. Yes, that the customer PI is very critical, and everything we do as far as these integrations go, the idea is to try to minimize that PI that we do share that goes between General Motors and the utility. So trying to minimize that and avoid any risk of sharing PI for our customers. Okay, I guess next slide then. So just kind of high level from a platform perspective, that we do have a GM Energy platform, as we talked about, that GM is working on that. So we are looking to have the ability to be able to connect directly to a utility or other aggregators using standard protocols, OpenADR 2.0. We're also developing APIs, and in some cases we have other utility partners that may not have as good of an IT department or is technically capable. And so we have some even like a SFTP kind of older school, easy way to share information, both receiving information from the utility as well as sending data back to the utility. So we're building up those kind of gateways so that the GM Energy platform does have a robust communication to utilities. And then we've also got on the other side, the GM Energy platform is then also doing the optimization internally and then sending the dispatch commands to the vehicles and able to send the information to the vehicles and receive that information, the charge session data or the charge event data coming back from the VVs. We're able to collect that on the GM Energy platform and store that in our databases on our platform. We do have, and we probably should throw in there, we also have direct utility, but we also, as I mentioned earlier, that we do collaborate with the OVGIP consortium. So we do have the ability as well to interface not only with the utility, but an OVGIP platform. So in that case, you do have the ability that one utility can talk to multiple OEMs through the OVGIP platform. And then next slide. Yeah, so going into a little bit, so some small scale EV testing, metering testing. So we have been trying to do that over the last year or so within GM that we're realizing this becomes important. We did have a small fleet of Chevy Bolts tested over approximately 100 charge sessions in collaboration with the public utility outside of New York State. The testing covered level 1, level 2, and DC fast charging scenarios. The testing setups were a little bit different. So for level 2 and the DC fast charging test, the EV charge session data is compared to measurements reported by, in most cases, a public EV charger. I think for level 2, we did have some where we had meters as well on our side, but for the most part, we were taking those to public charging stations and comparing the EV data to what the charging station had said that the vehicle had consumed for energy. For level 1, we did compare the charge session collected to a utilities meter. So we had a very accurate measurement there for that amount of energy being consumed from the wall into the vehicle. We also collected data for each charge session, the start-stop timestamp. So to say exactly when did the charge event occur. We collected the EV geolocation, so a lat long, very high precision. I think we're 6 or 7 decimal places on precision with really good accuracy on that. And the energy consumed kilowatt hours. So we did compare that, and we'll just talk about the estimated wall energy. We did compare both the estimated wall energy as well as the kilowatt hours going to the battery. As expected, the estimated wall energy, typically, except for the DC fast charging where there isn't as much energy loss, the estimated wall energy is typically going to be more accurate than the energy going into the battery. Next slide, Harris. So some additional thoughts on past testing. So the EV charge session data timestamp location can be very accurate. And so I guess the question that we have is we're talking through for the future and working with utilities, our utility partners. Can this data be effectively ingested by utilities? So if we do have that information on timestamp location, is it something you can use? And how will this data unlock new benefits and use cases for utilities? So again, just putting that out there that we do have the ability to give a lot of information in very accurate location. We saw in our testing, it was actually pretty interesting that when we compared to what the vehicle had compared to what like PlugShare said where like a charger was, that we definitely saw some discrepancies that we knew. And then we had a GPS unit that we had beside the vehicle. And in a lot of cases, the databases, the public databases for where charging, the chargers were located were actually off quite a bit compared to what we saw from the vehicle side. So I think there's some opportunities there that maybe we could even look at using the vehicle data and knowing where the charge sessions occur to improve the maps of where public chargers are to make that information easily or more easily available to people. I think then the final piece is I think what a lot of people we want to see is that from a measurement point of view, the kilowatt hours measured. From an average perspective, we typically were on an average 2 to 3% error of the measurement from the tested EVSE on average. So we did see cases where we did have individual events that did have errors greater than 2 or 3%. But when you took it the bulk of the 20 or 30 charge sessions for each method, we were typically seeing for the level 2 and level 1, we were typically in that ballpark of 2 to 3% error from what we predicted from an EV and what the meter had said we consumed. There's still a lot more testing that we need to do, that we need to refine and look at this more at an individual charge session. But from an overall whole, we are seeing somewhat good results with the 2-3% and happy to see those numbers. I'm not sure, Harris, if you want to jump onto the last slide and talk more about the kind of future, the next steps forward.
Sure. Yeah, I can take this, Mike. I mean,
okay.
I think just generally speaking, we have, as far as our kind of product roadmaps and the relationships and that we're trying to set up with our partners, and just the conversations, we're hoping to kind of surface with utilities and stakeholders in this place, just kind of really start to focus in some of these areas. I think Dell, another member of our team, might be on the call, so certainly let him chime in after this. But we're obviously really interested in interoperability between both the EVs and across other devices that might exist in somebody's home to basically just make this easy for the end user, much less the other kind of partners in the space. We're interested in being able to both kind of facilitate interoperability, but as well as just the overall integration, for the data from our EVs and the control that can be achieved, all down the chain as far as how EVs can be used in scenarios. Basically, tied into part of this conversation or some of the points that I think our colleagues at Ford made with relation to the working on the accuracy of our data as being, a tool for helping to identify that, the data coming off of EVs is useful and can potentially be used as a resource, to help alleviate the need for having to separately meter, EV charging and just to kind of help eliminate that sort of hurdle or burden for customers. We really want to see the ability to kind of send and process data either from GM or coming to GM in an efficient fashion. Really interested also in ensuring that our connections and the data that we're sharing is reliable, and that's leading to overall reliable energy systems like across multiple stakeholders. And where it's appropriate, the conversations around standardization, especially as it relates to the exchange of information and ensuring that if we are trying to pass along data on charge sessions across multiple utilities, it's something that we can do in a fairly standardized sort of way. I don't know, Del, if you want to chime in on any of those particular points, or you feel like that was pretty sufficiently covered.
Yeah, I think you did a great job at covering it. Thanks, Cyrus.
Okay, great. Thanks, Del. I think that pretty much takes us to the end. I think we're happy, the three of us are happy to take any additional questions, or Jen, if you're looking to kind of follow, Protary take questions at the end, we can do that as well.
Yeah, great. Thanks to the GM team for a really insightful presentation. I see two questions in the chat, so maybe we'll just do a few minutes now of Q&A for the GM team, and then if there's additional questions, we can take them at the end here. So I'm just going to read out the first question we have here from Chris Coy from National Grid. He writes, I have a question about whether the kilowatt hour measurements you get now or in the future will be interval data or clock aligned at all. Like, do you know kilowatt hour each hour of a charging session?
So it is getting better. Right now we don't have that ability. As I mentioned earlier, we will be getting that. We'll be getting data at a much more frequent interval. So roughly every 5%, or hopefully maybe a little bit more frequent change in state of charge, we'll be getting data. So it may not be exactly 1 hour, but hopefully for most people that are using like a 6 or 7 kilowatt hour, 6 or 7 kilowatt charger or home charger, we'd be able to get that data more than one data point per hour. So we would be able to do that. And again, that's with the kind of the current architecture. And then as we go forward with Ultifi, we would be getting more frequent and clock aligned data with those new architectures in the future. Does that answer the question, or is there any follow-up, Chris, on that?
No, great response. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to read the next question in the chat here from Rob Colley from DPS staff, and then I'll hand the floor over to Ted after that, who has his hand up here. So from Rob Colley from DPS staff, his question reads, on the data and reporting slide, does total load shed mean demand kilowatt reduced?
Yes, that's what that means. We do go through it, and actually, I think we working with the team at National Grid that when we did some programs with them, there was some additional work on that to come up with the definition of a total load shed. So we had the case where, like, if the vehicle was already at 99% state of charge, it began a demand response event, and it stopped charging for 2 hours, you wouldn't get the full event or the full participation of that full 2 hours. You just have what was available. But it is trying to go through it and do a more holistic calculation of what was that total demand that you're able to reduce, take into account what is like the current status of the battery at the beginning of the demand response event.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. So Ted, I see your hand up, and you also put a question in the chat, but maybe I'll just hand the floor to you in case you want to ask a question verbally.
I just say it out loud. So your algorithm probably does pretty good at a small percentage of auxiliary load compared to battery charging. But what if it's the opposite? Where you're done, the battery's done, and it's all auxiliary load? Do you have an estimate on your estimate?
We do estimate it. So we are taking into the 12-volt loads, the ancillary loads that do occur. But I don't have at this point in time. I wouldn't be able to give you a great estimate on the accuracy of those loads that aren't associated with charging the battery at this point in time.
2 to 3% is awesome. It was just like, okay, no, what happens when we go the other way when you have almost no information about accessories compared to the battery?
Correct. And so we do have some information on that. So we know high level what's the 12-volt load, and some of the other loads, again, that if you're using high voltage battery for some of the cabin preheating, we do have information on that. We are able to estimate that, but I don't have at this point in time a great answer for you. Unfortunately, I could guess, but I'd rather say at this point in time I don't have that piece of data for you right now.
Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ted. And Mike, we're going to take one more question right now for GM, and then we'll move on just looking at the time. But the last question in the chat I see here is from Steve Bright from WeaveGrid. His question reads, on slide 4, I believe there was a diagram that used V and I as abbreviations. Were these referring to voltage and current/power?
Yeah, so that was voltage and current. Yeah, so we're measuring current and voltage and to be able to then pull out what the power is.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. So thank you again to the GM team. This was a really insightful presentation. I appreciate you all taking the time to chat with us today. If there are more questions for GM, please feel free to throw them in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end of the next hour or so here. But with that, looking at time, I'm going to hand the floor over to our next presenters from Tesco.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right, and I just got to share my screen here and share content. Bear with me a second. This one. Okay. All right, can you guys see the presentation there?
Not yet on our end.
No. Okay, it says it's being shared. Try that again. There we go. Okay, how about now?
Looks good.
All right. All right, well, thank you for inviting us. My name is Tom Lawton with Tesco, the Eastern Specialty Company. Our area of expertise is electric metering. That's what we do. We make everything in and around the electric meter, as well as a variety of test equipment and standards. We participate in we are a voting member, and I've been a voting member of the ANSI C12 committee forever, I guess. I don't know. I see a couple of other people on here, like Tom Nelson, who have also been on that committee for a number of times. We're going to talk a little bit about what ANSI C12 is and the relevance to the electric vehicle market, as well as just a little bit about some standards and things for that. All right, and I will try and I've got till about 3 o'clock. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's about right. Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Tom.
All right, no problem. All right, so ANSI, American National Standard Institute. It's not a government agency. All the compliance is voluntary, and the standards don't have the force of law. There is an exception, of course. When the New York State Public Service Commission issues their rulings and regulatory requirements for electric metering in the state of New York for the utilities that they regulate, They have a whole list of things that they want the utilities to do. And typically, the catch-all at the end of not only New York State, but virtually every state actually every state in the country, is they say anything not covered here should be compliant with ANSI C12. And ANSI C12 is basically all of that is the section that covers electric metering. ANSI C12-1 is the main standard, but there are a variety of others, and I'll at least touch on them in this afternoon's presentation. All right. ANSI itself is a complete volunteer organization. All of the members, who I'll discuss in a few minutes, are all volunteers. We all donate our time, for lack of a better term. Nobody gets paid for being on an ANSI committee other than the salary that they might get from their host company. We also do have a secretariat, and that secretariat for ANSI C12 is NEMA, the National Electrical Manufacturers Association. The NEMA members who participate fund that secretariat, so they pay for that secretary. NEMA they have a section just for utility products. They do have other ones as well. And they are the ones who actually publish the standards. So when you go and you purchase an ANSI standard, you're actually purchasing it through NEMA, because again, ANSI is just strictly a volunteer organization. All right. NEMA organizes those committees. They set up the agendas. They make sure that the correct standards are reviewed. Standards, we try to republish them every 5 years. That's been more of a challenge in recent years. If they are abandoned if they're not updated or reaffirmed once every 10 years. The electric utility, being as conservative as we are, we have to maintain standards for maybe longer than normal. We have standards that go back and cover things that have gone out of the general use for over 20, 30, and 40 years, but they are still in the general population of meters that are out in the world. Our standards, it's a consensus approach. That's not exactly the same as unanimous, although we are always working towards a unanimous decision. If there's any dissension, we always look at any no votes. We get a full comment. We try and modify our drafts, which will eventually become standards, to get a unanimous decision if we can, but it is a consensus approach. And we can never draft anything that would take a standard practice or an existing manufacturer and codify them out, as it were, make a standard that says, oh no, your equipment is no good any longer. It was good, now it's not good. We don't do that. Let's see. So again, C12 group of standards, that is everything about electric metering. If you have trouble sleeping at night, you don't need drugs, you just need ANSI C12. Just read it. You will get tired quickly. The general makeup, there are 30 voting members. Typically, they try and do 10, 10, and 10. It doesn't quite work out that way usually, but you cannot have, by our own charter, we cannot have any one group more than 40%. The three groups are manufacturers, users, which are utilities, and general interest. So utility commissions can join, people like UL or IEEE can join, consultants can join. Typically, a lot of these consultants are people who have retired from either a career with a manufacturer or a career at a utility, sometimes both. That is the general interest. So, for example, I mentioned Tom Nelson from NIST. He would be general interest, as opposed to a utility or a manufacturer. We meet biannually. We meet twice a year. It's always in conjunction with the Edison Electrical Institute and the Association of Edison Illuminating Companies. We meet in conjunction with their biannual metering meeting, which makes a lot of sense. Many of the attendees will actually attend both. The EEI meeting starts on Sunday and goes through Wednesday at noon. The ANSI meetings start on Monday and go through Thursday at noon. So there is some overlap, and sometimes you have to make a choice between the two meetings. All right, ANSI C12-1, Code for Electricity Metering. That is, so we always have a date. just like other standards. You're probably familiar with that, ISO and things of this nature. Tells you that in 2022 is the last time that we released C12.1. All right, it's for all types of AC, watt-hour meters, demand registers, pulse devices, auxiliary devices. ANSI C12, it's a main committee. On the main committee, we are the ones that vote for the final approval of all activities in that family of standards. And we also establish the subcommittees and working groups so that we can work on all of these various standards. The subcommittees and working groups, face-to-face meetings twice a year. However, through the miracle of Zoom and Teams and WebEx, if you're on an active, one or more active working group or subcommittee, there's a very good possibility that you are having an ANSI meeting every week, sometimes multiple times a week, or if you're even marginally involved, you're probably meeting a couple of times in between those face-to-face meetings. The face-to-face meetings are valuable because a lot of times you can work toward that consensus that we discussed before. You can work to that consensus, and you get a lot more discussions between the sessions about new topics that need to be considered. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a few minutes. So the work is really done in the subcommittees. Every subcommittee works differently. It depends on who is chairing it, how active they are, how frequently they need to meet. But they do all meet again in person during typically Monday and Tuesday of the biannual meeting. And then when we go to Wednesday, that's where all of those start to report up. And Thursday morning is the big main committee meeting. C12.1 meets on Wednesday, and then C12 main meets on Thursday morning. Those are the two large meetings. They are done after the EEI meetings are finished, so everyone can attend. All right. So what changed in ANSI? What changed in ANSI was the smart grid, the smart meter, advanced metering infrastructure, AMI. AMI really changed everything in the metering world, in the electric metering world. First implementations began in 2007. The late adopters are getting into AMI now. By the time we get to 2025, we'll probably have well over 90%, possibly over 95% of the electric meters in the US and Canada will have some sort of AMI system, AMI being two-way communication with the meter. And many utilities are already starting on what we call AMI 2.0. Why did this change everything? Because the meter is no longer simply an energy measurement device. There is a lot more going on under the cover. There are many new technologies that weren't even envisioned, and we found on the ANSI committees that we were playing catch up for probably a good 10 years. We were trying to create standards for equipment, and I'll use as an example disconnect switches. There are now disconnect switches in virtually every meter being installed in the United States and Canada. We didn't even begin thinking about putting a standard together for disconnect switches. How do you test them? What's good performance? How do we know it's acceptable performance? Just something as simple as that. We didn't even begin until there were 5, 6, 7 years worth of disconnect switches already out in the market. That's really working from behind. And that's just one example. So much has changed under the cover in the electric meter. We have been extremely busy for 15 years, just as the meter manufacturers themselves have been extremely busy trying to produce all of these meters. So it's been difficult, and we talk about contentious items or difficult debates. We've had meetings that went on for 3 hours just discussing what is a meter. So here we are 150 years after the first meter was 1872, and here we were in the late 2010s, 2018, 19, and we're trying to figure out what the heck is a meter, because so much has changed under the cover of that meter only in the past 10 years at that point. The meters had gone relatively unchanged for over 100 years. All right, so what are some of these subcommittees and working groups? I'm not going to try and go through all of them, but I'll just give you a flavor for them and talk about some of the ones that might be of some interest here. A standards roadmap, and that included DC metering. DC metering, the first meter that I talked about in 1872 was a DC meter. DC meters, they were a thing in the 1870s and the 1880s into the 1890s. But by the early 1900s, AC has won the war. Niagara Falls is being built with the generators there, AC generators. The only statue there on the US side of Niagara Falls is to Nikola Tesla. The first standard, or the first electric meterman's handbook and standard, comes out in 1910. At that point, DC metering was dead. So the very first standard never included DC metering. And fun fact, Tesco was part of it. So we were there in 1910, not me personally, but we were there in 1910. But now all of a sudden we had to come out with DC metering. Talk a little bit more about why that is, but we've now released a standard on DC metering, and it is the first one ever. Demand type testing, that's something that's been 120 years. There's still a demand type testing working group. Safety related requirements, we decided to call them out of all the other documents, put them into one document. We have to work with outside agencies, UL, OIML, Organizational Legal Metrology, which is a worldwide organization, and I'm going to wrap up the presentation with them. Temperature rise working group, in-service testing working group. How do you know that all the meters out there are good to test? We're hoping that this will also provide guidance for folks like on electric vehicles. Now, Bureau of Weights and Measures has their own requirements, but if utilities are doing the work, they could look to ANSI or they could look to Bureau of Weights and Measurements for guidance. DC metering, I just said that's become extremely important. We released the standard, and in fact, when we released it, we knew that it was incomplete, but we also knew that we had to get something out there to start providing guidance. So we are republishing that. Our goal is to republish it every year or every other year, which is a little unusual. Watt-hour meter sockets, protocol specifications for data communication, which is also incredibly important for electric vehicles. Subcommittee on Blondell compliant metering. You can meter, if you meter in a non-Blondell compliant way, you will not get accurate results unless a whole string of things are also true, which are never true in the real world, like fully balanced loads, perfect phase angles, etc. Why is that applicable to you guys? Because measuring energy is something that the electric utility industry has done very well for 120 years. But now energy measurement is going outside of our little world. It's going to electric vehicle chargers. It's going to street lights, which have never been metered before. There's a host of equipment out there now that are embedding meters, non-ANSI meters. We consider an ANSI meter the round ones that you're familiar with on the side of your house. The sub-metering market. All of these things are kind of stretching, and we're trying to provide guidance for each of those. All right. Some of the things that we talk about, temperature range. Okay, you'd think, well, temperature range. Our temperature range typically goes down to, for example, minus 40 degrees. Why minus 40 degrees? Because that's the range of single stage refrigeration. So if you want to go below minus 40 in the lab, it becomes very expensive. However, and as much as minus 40 may be okay, that's where Celsius and Fahrenheit meet. That's pretty cold. But if you're Hydro-Quebec, if you're Bangor Hydro, if you're Central Maine Power, minus 40 isn't really good enough. You get minus 50, and how's that new AMI meter performing at minus 50? Is it still performing? We cleared up ambiguity in the testing of the meters relative to the reference meters. What tests are for type testing? What tests are for field testing? Agreed on a voltage range over which the meters will remain accurate. I bring those up because we also had to do some of the same things, the accuracy required for DC metering, as well as other new types of metering. Disturbance test, extended temperature, true polyphase loading, harmonics testing. The world with all these switching power supplies and new motor controllers and things, we are generating at the user end, we're generating a lot of harmonics. What's the problem with harmonics? We no longer have anything resembling a sinusoidal curve. The problem with that is up until last year, all of our meters were designed assuming a perfect sinusoidal curve. So now we've introduced harmonics testing, and we've introduced not the entire universe, just a very few examples of typical harmonics that we see out there. And now we have to make sure that our new meters being produced can handle those harmonics and accurately measure the area under the curve or the energy that we are actually consuming. Auxiliary device influences, how are they interfering with the accuracy? Because we're putting all these other things under the cover. Are they interfering with the accuracy? Extended voltage range and temperature ranges. Field testing, believe it or not, ANSI never addressed field testing. Why? Because we were always working in the shop and in the lab. We said those are controlled environments. The field is not a controlled environment. However, the industries eventually demanded, they said, we got to have some guidance. Why is that important? Because electric vehicle chargers, you're never going to be able to take one and bring it back to the lab like you could with an electric meter. You have to do field testing. So we're publishing this as a technical report. Why are we publishing this as a technical report? We're publishing it that way because not all utilities want to go that way, because they have existing practices. Some say I don't do field testing. Some say I only do it this way. No, I want to do it this way. So we're trying to simply, by doing a technical report, we're trying to do something. That will at least provide some guidance, because there is definitely not a consensus. Other working groups, VA and VAR. Again, VA and VAR, we're trying to address things like horrible power factors out there. Once upon a time, all of our residential meters were all had a power factor of 1 because they were all resistive loads in the home. Now that is far from true, and the standard 2S meter, if you're familiar with the industry, the standard meter that is on your home is not a Blondell meter, and it does not handle all of these harmonics very well. So we're starting to have an issue, and some of the manufacturers and some of the utilities are saying, hey, let's move away from that. Let's just go with VA and VAR metering, meaning that we will measure the amount of energy we're delivering, not the amount of energy that you're using. And I'll liken it to a gasoline hose. If you go to a gas station, go to fill up your car, and there's gasoline pouring out of the hose that's not getting into your car, you are paying for it. In the utility industry, that's not how we work. If that gas is not getting into your car, you're only paying for the amount that got into your car. The utility is paying for all the stuff on the ground. That's the difference with power factor. With the power factor, a poor power factor means you're only getting a little bit into your car. The utility is paying for the rest. So it's an ongoing discussion. All right. CI 12.1 and 12.20. 12.20 was for our high-end, high-accuracy metering. We did that about 25 years ago. Now we are rolling that back into the main part of C12.1 because they started to go out of sync with one another, and all the meters are really that good anymore, so there was no reason for a separate standard. Also, we needed to adopt the standard of the structure of OIML, which is an international regulation, and one which by treaty we are obligated to conform with, and which as of today we don't quite, but we are almost there now. I just talked about active, reactive, and apparent energy. That's the power factor issue that I was just discussing. And then our draft to become compliant with OIML. In the interest of time, I'll skip through some of this. This one here, this is important. DC metering. Again, there was never a DC metering standard. Now we have a standard. We have something that we can provide guidance with. We have accuracy classes. It is possible, several utilities have already built homes that are all DC, and I believe some private groups have also built homes that are all DC. It is possible in the future that the meter of tomorrow brings in AC power, because AC is really good at transmission and distribution, DC is not, but has a very high-end and clean converter built into the meter or just in front of the meter that at 98+% efficiency converts that power. The switching power supplies that you charge your laptop and your phones on are often 85%, 80%, 70%. They're not very efficient, so they get warm. All that heat, that's energy loss, that's inefficiency. So we've created a DC standard. Our metrology lab, we believe, is the first one that is an accredited 17025 lab for DC energy measurement. And we created a way to make it all traceable back to an international, a national lab. We used NRC because we also do work, we do have offices in Canada, although our headquarters are here in Pennsylvania. So the DC standard is, as I said before, we published it last year and we are working on it assiduously. And we have another subcommittee dealing with another issue in DC metering as well. Sub-metering, we are trying to address sub-metering and providing better guidance in that. That's a topic ANSI had typically not gotten very involved in. All right. Last thing, Organization of Legal Metrology, OIML. All right. By treaty, we're supposed to be compliant. It's an organization that has no legal authority, but everybody is all of the member states are supposed to be compliant with it. Where were we not compliant? In some of our definitions. Some of our definitions were just a little bit different than OIML's. We have been working very hard to adopt that structure and convert everything that we already had in ANSI C12, convert it into that structure and use the same terminology. We didn't change anything in the US. Nobody has to do anything different, but we use different words, we use a different structure, and it actually helped to clean up a certain amount of ambiguity. The last meeting was actually last week in the Netherlands. Our former CTO, Bill Hardy, who retired a couple of years ago, he's the technical liaison. He just arrived back, and they were working on what they believed to be the final few differences and trying to resolve them. He'll bring back what they worked on, and we hope to be compliant here within the next 6 months or so. All right. One of the most active subgroups in OIML is all about the measurement of electricity being dispensed by electric vehicles. As always, every country does it a little different. Europe is doing it differently from the way Canada does it, is doing it a little bit differently from the way we think we're going to go ahead and do it here in the US, although there are no definites yet anywhere. Everybody's still trying to figure it out as we go, especially as the DC superchargers get larger and larger and larger. The amount of energy that they are consuming, I know that there's, 350s now are out there, 450s are about to be out there, and I believe 600s are being prototyped now. The voltages were 400 volts, I think, 800 volts, and now they have 1,000 volts. They're bringing a megawatt of power into charging stations now. It's a tremendous amount of power, and testing that in the field is a little bit of a challenge, and we've been working on that quite a bit. We've had testers for electric vehicle chargers for several years now, but it seems as quickly as we get our designs completed and into production and out into the marketplace, the market is it grows. I do a lot of presentations on the electric vehicle market and its adoption, and the thing that always amazes me is we put all these great curves out there as to where the market's going to go, these big hockey sticks. And for the first time in my memory, you're putting out these hockey sticks and you update it the next year, and the hockey stick was even steeper than was projected. So it's fairly impressive. And I believe that wraps it up. I was 9 minutes late. I'm sorry about that.
No, that was really insightful. Thank you so much, Tom. That was really helpful to learn more on the nuances of ANSI. If folks have questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat or raise your hand. We'll do a few minutes of questions now, and then we'll hand the floor over to our last presenter. If we don't get to your question, we'll get to it around the end of the meeting. I see a note from Ted here just that I think you mean dispense 2 electric vehicles. I don't know, Tom, if you want to weigh in on that there.
It was just grammar. It was the to and from thing. So just to point out, we're not concerned about bidirectional in this committee.
Yeah, got it. Thanks,
Okay.
thanks, Ted and,
All right,
and Tom.
thanks.
I feel like I have a million questions for you right now, Tom, but maybe I can just get us started with one here. You mentioned that there's a difference in the way that Canada, Europe, and the U.S. is kind of dealing with the measuring energy dispensed to EVs. Is there any more detail you can provide on how our counterparts abroad are thinking of this issue and how that might differ from how we're thinking through it?
Sure. Well, first of all, just in terms of who is responsible for it, right now in the U.S., what we are saying is that the Bureau of Weights and Measures, NIST, has decided Bureau of Weights and Measures is going to be responsible for this, with one important exception, and that is that if an electric utility is providing the power and dispensing the electricity direct to the consumer, so they own the charging station, then the utility is going to be responsible. And it's very unclear. And of course, Bureau of Weights and Measures, with only a few exceptions, most of the states have no experience in electrical energy measurement. So it's taking a group of folks and it's giving them a very new responsibility without a lot of background, and that's been difficult. That group is also used to regulations and certainty, and is very impatient with the lack of equipment, with the lack of standards, with the inability to test some of the new things that are out there, and dispensing things to consumers that they cannot certify. In Europe, some of the things that are happening is the responsibility is in different hands. They also require, if you are putting in some of these DC superchargers, I believe it's Germany, requires you to have battery storage at each of these because of the spikes on the grid. Utilities are interested in the US in controlling it because if they control it and own it, they can determine where best to put these chargers. And for a utility, there are two parts to that answer. Part number one is you want it at a transportation nexus, so somewhere between several highways or right off of a highway, but you also want it where your distribution system can handle putting a lot of new power. Whereas in the private sector, they are caring strictly about the real estate cost and where the transportation nexus is. Putting it across a 4-lane highway on the other side of it may mean a difference of many millions of dollars in what it costs you to put that infrastructure. So again, it's in Europe. They're from a regulatory standpoint, they're looking at it a little bit differently. They're setting up the infrastructure a little bit differently. They have different requirements on the testing, but they are also moving faster, but with typically not quite, their emphasis is not on the 450s and the 600s kW units. Their emphasis on getting more and more out there as quickly as possible and trying to deal with a lot of the Gordian knots that are arising from overlapping users, constituents, and private sector information. So it's interesting. It's all a little bit different. Again, even the US and Canada are a little bit different, and Europe is different again. Does that partially answer the question, Jennifer?
Yeah, no, that was really helpful. Thank you, Tom. I feel like I could ask you many more questions, but I am looking at the time, and I want to make sure we give our last presenters ample time to run through their material. So I just want to suggest thank you, Tom, for the amazing presentation. I learned a ton from your slide deck, and I think with that, let's hand the floor over to EPA and ICF to talk through Energy Star.
Great, thank you. While Abhishek is putting up the slides, I'll just quickly say, my name is James Kwan from Energy Star program. Today, we're going to talk about the Energy Star certified EVSE. I will cover some of the basic high-level stuff on Energy Star program and the certification process, and then Abhishek will take over and cover more of the technical side of our spec. So next slide. Again, my name is James Kwan. I'm a product manager here at EPA Energy Star, joined by my colleague, Abhishek Star. He's a managing consultant and also the lead technical person for our spec. Next slide, please. So just a really high level overview, just in case you have not heard of what Energy Star is. We are a voluntary program, part of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Our goal is to deliver cost savings, energy efficient solutions to protect the climate, improve air quality, and protect public health. We cover a lot of products. I'm sure most of you hopefully have seen our logo on your appliances or computers and room air cleaners and televisions. And obviously we also cover EVSE and I want to say 75 plus products that we cover. Next slide. So the question is, why Energy Star EV chargers? Well, first of all, it's safety tested and certified, which obviously means it's a convenient path to code compliance. Another thing is it saves energy and money for EV chargers and owners and operator. We also encourage open standard for communication protocols. And our Energy Star brand is, it's known and it's recognized throughout US and Canada. And we also provide educational resources. Next slide. So this is a graphic that shows just kind of how our program, the energy certification process works. So once you join Energy Star as a partner, then you can submit your product to labs, the accredited labs or CB witnessed supervised labs, which I'll get into in the subsequent slides, through our certification body. And once it's been tested through the labs, it comes back to EPA. And then your product can be put on our qualified product lists, and it can be searchable on our product finders. And you can see some of the timeline from becoming a partner to getting your product certified. Could be days, weeks, depending on many different things. And once we receive it, it'll be on our qualified product list within 24 hours. Next slide, please. So it all starts with just filling out a partnership application form online. You can just go to our website. If you want to sell your products in US or Canada, you can fill out the application form, send it to that join@energystar.gov inbox, and somebody will reach back out to you, kind of guiding you through the different processes and all the paperwork that you need. Next slide. So again, we're a voluntary program. We don't do any testing in-house. We are a third-party certification program, and the products must be certified by an EPA-recognized CB or certification body, and based on testing in an EPA-recognized lab. Like I said, the certification program is now in effect for over 75 plus Energy Star categories and products. And each of our spec has a test method which the labs are required to follow in order to test those products that get sent in. There are two ways. We can go to the next slide, Abhishek. There are two options to get your EV chargers or EVSE certified. So option number one is the in-house witness laboratory testing. So if you're a manufacturer, you need to enroll in an in-house lab as a witnessed/supervised manufacturer test lab through an EPA-recognized CB. Currently, we have 3 CBs for EVSE with approved SMTL programs. You see the list there, the UL, the TUV, and Intertech. And the names associated with each of them are just the contact that we have that we constantly talk to. So, if you need to certify your charger, then you can reach out to them and ask them how to do that, testing-wise, test method-wise. And the second option, which is most widely used in most of our products, is the third-party laboratory testing. The manufacturers must confirm with an EPA CB that the lab is acceptable under our program. And those are really the two ways for us to receive those test results back, for us to be able to recognize you as an Energy Star partner and for your product to be listed in our qualified product list. Next slide. So EVS Energy Star recognized bodies you see on the right, the AC accredited laboratory, and right below it, the DC fast charge accredited labs. And on the right, you see the list of CVs that are working with us currently when it comes to EV chargers. And I have to be honest, I am not the certification expert at Energy Star. It's actually Brian Kraus. His name is written there with his email. Feel free to reach out to him. I'm just kind of covering for him. And well, this is high level that all of us here at Energy Star knows. But if you need to ask any nitty gritty questions about certification process, please reach out to Brian Kraus. Next slide. So here I'll hand it over to Abhishek and he'll cover the spec.
Thanks, James. So before I dive into the content, I wanted to give you all a heads up that just yesterday we released the version 1.2 specification. So that's going to be the current version. Now there isn't any major or a significant update to the standard, and I'll be covering what had changed in the subsequent slides, but just wanted to lay it out. Now, the Energy Star standard consists of both AC and DC chargers, and we have the corresponding test methods for the same, which were developed with significant inputs from the industry, utilities, as well as the national labs. Coming to the DC fast charger specifications, the scope of Energy Star standards goes up to 350 kilowatt. And for the products ranging between 0 to 65 kilowatt, we have operation mode criteria, which basically deals with your active charging efficiency, and also the standby mode criteria. However, when it comes to products from 65 kilowatt all the way up to 350 kilowatt, we only have the standby mode requirements. The reason for that is that we did not have enough data available when we released the standard back in 2021 to test these products out rigorously and come up with levels to identify and distinguish the most efficient chargers available on the market. However, we are considering expanding the scope even further. Another issue that we ran into back then was the test labs were building out their capabilities. Even today, we have seen that there are very few labs which offer testing up to 350 or 400 kilowatt. And that is why, like James mentioned, we allow products to be tested in a witness testing fashion. If you compare the products that are up to 65 kilowatt, we have observed that the ones that are Energy Star certified save up to 1.5 megawatt hour per year over the ones which are not certified. This is more like an industry average. And the products that are we currently have somewhere close to like 37 DC certified products on the Energy Star list. And you can check out those products using the link mentioned here. Okay, coming to the criteria for DC fast chargers. So like I mentioned, there is like a no vehicle mode testing as well as the partial on mode testing, which basically correlates to the SAE standby energy modes. And with that, we basically came up with a logarithmic equation using the data we got from the manufacturers. In addition to this, we provide allowances for certain features like your Wi-Fi or cellular connection, as well as your display. Now, the allowance for display is taken from the Energy Star display specification, which basically correlates to the signage displays used for advertisement. And we observe that the energy consumption plateaus after a particular point. Hence, we have this really fancy equation which accounts for your screen size, resolution, and translates that to the power consumption of the display. Coming to the operation mode testing, so we have basically two equations. The first one on the left is like a weighting we developed based on the performance of the charger across various temperature conditions. So we require the product to be tested at 20 degrees, 68 degrees, and then at the 104 degree Fahrenheit temperature condition. The reason for this was that we observed that there is significant change in the efficiency of the charger depending on the temperature and humidity. As such, we require the product to be tested in a temperature chamber. Now, to develop these weightings, we analyzed the weather data across the 6 cities which fall in the different Building America climate zones and came up with this weighting. The equation on the right, if you see, it's more like testing the product at various loading conditions. Now we observed that the efficiency of the product also depends on the loading, and as the battery state of charge changes, we have seen that the loading condition of the charger drops down. As such, we also developed weightings and conduct the product and require the product to be tested at 25, 50, 75, and 100% loading conditions. Coming to the AC side of things, on the AC EVSE, Energy Star only has criteria for standby mode. We do not have any operation mode criteria because we realized that most of the losses here would be copper losses, and it does not make sense to require testing for operation mode criteria. Coming to the energy savings, we have observed that most of the chargers, when it comes to AC, are in their standby mode about 85% of the time. And as such, the savings we found out from that analysis were close to 40% over the non-Energy Star certified chargers. We also observed that there are various products available on the market which are sold without any safety standards, and as such, EPA requires that every product that is sold under the Energy Star label to be NRTL listed. So that takes into account all the UL safety certifications, etc. Coming to the savings, we have observed that an Energy Star certified AC charger saves up to 30 kilowatt hour per year over a non-Energy Star certified charger. And we have close to 180 qualified products on the Energy Star list from over 50 manufacturers. So coming to this particular slide, on the right side, you see how EPA considers the specification development. That is basically how we revise a standard. So the process starts with like conducting an engineering and market analysis, and we basically look out for any savings opportunities which might have culminated from the technological advancements or some other software areas which can be implemented, or like demand response programs, etc. With that, we see what potential updates need to be made to the test method and optimize the test method accordingly. We then require the manufacturers to test their products to the revised test method and submit us the data. And based on that, we come up with the levels for the Energy Star metric and publish the standards as in the form of subsequent drafts till everyone comes into an agreement and the standard is finalized. Coming to the version 1.2 standard that was released yesterday. So this was a minor update from the previous version with regards to some of the updates that were required by various states. So the first one being the requirement pertaining to the ISO 15118 standard. Many states and utilities require the EVSE to carry a PLC board which supports the ISO 15118 hardware capability, which basically allows your V2G as well as some cybersecurity and TLS level requirements. So these boards typically consume additional power and required some allowance beyond the one mentioned in the Energy Star standard. The second one is the credit card reader, wherein some states just require RFID, NFC-based tap credit cards, but there are some that actually require you to have the physical chip reading capability in your credit card readers, which takes the power allowance to be higher than the ones with the tap functionality. So we needed to modify that allowance to a certain extent. NFC and RFID systems are required by certain states for authentication and occupancy detection purposes. Revenue grade meter. So like Tom mentioned earlier, we had some discussions with the manufacturers wherein we asked them if the Energy Star standard could incorporate the ANSI metering requirements, and we received significant pushback from the manufacturers who mentioned that they basically comply with the CTEP, NTEP requirements, and in other countries, some measurement instrument directives, Measurement Canada, that is coming soon, some German metering laws. However, they mentioned that it was difficult for them to meet the metering requirements mentioned in the ANSI C12 standard. So the suggestion that the manufacturers and the industry gave us was to require the NIST Handbook 44, Section 3.40 to be referenced when it came to revenue grade metering, and most of them design their meters in accordance with that standard. So if it comes to like metering accuracy, displays, data storage, and retrieval, they follow the NIST Handbook requirements, and that is what Energy Star harmonized with. In addition to this, we also offer them allowances with regards to some speakers and occupancy detection, because these systems help in optimizing the energy consumption and efficiency of the EVSE. This slide gives an overview of various Energy Star partners, both AC and DC. The last slide is our contact information if you have any questions. I know I rushed through the deck, but we are almost at the end of our time. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us and we'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Abhishek and James. That was a very helpful presentation to go through how Energy Star works. Similar to after Tom finished, I have a bunch of questions I could ask you, but looking at the time, maybe what we'll do is just go through the next step slides just for stakeholders that need to hop off, and then we can cover any questions after that. So Lindsay, if you can please pull up that slide. Great, thank you. And just to note for stakeholders, we'll be reconvening on July 26th of 2023. This is an update from July 12th. There'll be an updated notice posted in DMM. We'll be discussing the RFI results during that meeting. If you'd like to contact our team, we can be reached at evsc@dps.ny.gov. And maybe we'll just leave the slide up, but if there are any questions for, I don't know, Abhishek and James, if you could hold on for an extra minute or two. If there are any questions on Energy Star, please feel free to throw them in the chat or use that hand raise feature to ask any questions. I see a hand up from Chris Coy.
I know we're at time. I just wanted to, I guess, share my understanding of where things sit in New York, which is as of Monday, next Monday, the NYSERDA regulation goes into effect requiring that all EVSE, like AC EVSE moving forward, are compliant with Energy Star 1.0. And obviously you just talked about the 1.2 standard, which will require, not require NIST Handbook 44 compliance, correct? It just says if you are compliant, there's sort of allowances for that. So I guess my question is clarifying the metering topic, but also to share that as of Monday, New York State is requiring Energy Star AC chargers moving forward.
Yes. So Chris, I can take that. Basically, whenever we release like a dot version, so 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, it's usually backward compatible. So basically any of the products that are certified to 1.0 or 1.1 will remain to be certified to version 1.2. You don't need to recertify them. Now coming to your question about the NIST handbook requirements. So yes, if the products want to claim that additional allowance for revenue grade metering, they'll need to be recertified to version 1.2. However, if they are able to meet the requirements without that additional allowance, they are good as it is. You don't need to do anything.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Harris at GM. Can I ask just a clarifying question about that? Is that the requirement for EVSC being Energy Star in 1.0 in New York State for like participation in like the Make Ready programs, or I just guess it wasn't clear what that requirement applies to.
This is Chris. I'll try not to interpret the regulation for anyone, as I am not a lawyer, but the NYSERDA regulation appears to suggest that chargers manufactured June 26th or beyond are expected to meet the Energy Star 1.0 standard in New York State. And I'll post a link to that page if it's helpful.
Yeah, thanks. That would be appreciated.
Thanks for the follow-up question. I was on mute before, so apologies for leaving you all in the silence there for a moment. There is supposed to be a representative on from NYSERDA. I don't see their name on the list there, but if there's follow-up questions, we can get back to you. They're supposed to attend these meetings. But thanks for throwing that in the chat there, Chris. And if there's follow-ups, we can loop them in as well, Harris. And what I shared earlier while I was on mute by accident is just validating to hear Abhishek and James that you're hearing a similar pushback regarding requiring ANSI for EVSC. We've heard something very similar, and just manufacturers advocating for the NISP Handbook 44 as the standard at this point. It's validating to hear that you're all seeing a similar reaction in the Energy Star space. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, totally.
I guess just one last question. I know we're over, but I'd be curious to hear from both of you. Is there any auditing process for a manufacturer lab certifying under Energy Star, or how does that work typically?
I can take that one. Yeah. So we do have what's called a verification testing on all, most of our products, where once a year, and correct me if I'm wrong, Abhishek, once a year we pull products, and this is all part of the partnership agreement, and it gets randomly tested to make sure that they're meeting our criteria. But now for DC chargers, we are still kind of working through our way as to how that might be done, just because it is sort of a different beast than AC, and I believe AC is under verification testing. It's part of that. So yeah, to answer your question, Jennifer, we do have a quote unquote audit process in our program built in.
Also, to add to what James said, all the labs need to be accredited to ISO 17025 standard. So that is also an additional requirement for the manufacturer labs before they participate in the witness testing program.
Okay, got it. That's helpful to hear. Thank you both. I'm keeping my eye on the time and wanting to be mindful of all of your time. Thank you so much, James and Abhishek, for taking the time to present today. We really appreciate it. And if there's any follow-ups, please feel free to contact us. We're at evsc@dps.ny.gov, and we'll be reconvening on July 26th. And just thank you again to all of our presenters. Have a great afternoon, everyone.